Good morning and good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of Random Trek, where, yes, we have finally escaped that dreaded time warp, made it to 1986, and back to the year 2022. My name is Captain Christopher Ingle, and as always, joined by my trusty first officer, Commandant Brennan, the Mystical Mar. Brennan, how are we doing after this time warp trip?
That much is certain.
This is true. Very true. But today, while we are looking at Star Trek 4, we had to pick up an expert to save the future of Star Trek. We needed an expert from the 80s. And so we decided to pick up a friend of ours from 1986. He is the host of Reilly's Cantina. He is a fan of the other Star franchise, but also likes the Trek as well. He is Mr. Mark Yodi Reilly. Mark, how are you doing today?
I'm fine, gentlemen. Good to be here. God, when you said expert back there on this movie, I was like, and then you said of 80s, I was like, okay, yeah. Okay, we can go with that.
He's our Starfleet specialist.
He is our specialist. Yes.
I'm wearing blue. I'm not wearing a red shirt. That's for damn sure.
Blue shirts don't die in Star Trek. Statistically true.
It's usually red shirts or yellow shirts in the Next Generation.
Is that right? Okay.
That is true.
I just know the red shirt is not a good sign for those folk.
Do you know somebody did the math and more yellow shirts die than red shirts in the original series?
Is that right? Okay.
That is true. Somebody broke down the math.
We need to change the memes out there, and we need to get a viral moment going here.
Absolutely.
People need to be educated.
But
Indeed,
yes, we finally get to review Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, or as everyone else knows it, the one with the whales. Brennan, real quick here, how'd you feel about this going in?
Oh, I love this movie. This is the first Star Trek movie I ever saw. My family, we quote this movie repeatedly at home. Whether it's Everybody Remember Where We Parked, or Alameda, or How Do You Feel? We quote this stuff all the time. In fact, I got a photo of the exact area where they cross the street with the next to the Winchell's Donuts there in San Francisco.
Nice.
Yes.
And my profile picture on Twitter and Facebook is exactly where Leonard Nimoy climbs out of the whale tank.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But we got our specialist here, Brennan. I want to hear from him. So as we always ask our guests, Reilly, and yours is a little bit different. I know you're not as big a Trek guy, but I want to know, where does your love of Trek and Star Trek 4 specifically come from?
Well, you mentioned the child of the 80s part. I was kind of devouring all these movies that came out, and at the time, Wrath of Khan missed me, and that might have been because of my lack of knowledge of Star Trek, but it was like you, Brennan. Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, is my very first Trek ever. It was the first movie I saw in the franchise, and I loved it because of the time traveling and maybe the whales, but loving the fact that they were in our time. And I'm like, maybe that was how it became a little bit approachable for me. And then consequently, that's what led me to Wrath of Khan, which we can get in later. But yeah, so that's expert on this movie. Not really. I just saw it a lot. I just thought it really balanced and was there in the 80s and kind of a perfect representation of the 80s at that time. Because it was in 1986 it came out, right? Okay, so, I'm like knee deep in this stuff. I'm in like Gremlins world and Back to the Future and obviously Star Wars and, Superman and all these movies that defined me. This fit nicely in there because I finally knew of Star Trek, but then, okay, they're back here and this time, let's see what's going on. And I enjoyed the hell out of it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I definitely it is a piece of the 80s in all of its best
Mhm.
ways. I was watching this as we were watching this and just looking at the cars going, dear God, we drove all those. I can't believe that.
Yeah, yeah. And
Or
I
use phone booths.
I know.
right. And if I remember correctly, I mean, it really was a friend of mine that introduced it to me. And then I vividly remember watching Wrath of Khan later. But the backstory of what's going on in the Trek franchise at that time, when they tell me, this is spoilers back in 86, they're like, you know what happened in the past two movies? I'm like, no, what? And they told me, and I found it very fascinating that I had to go start over.
Uh-huh.
Awesome.
Yes. Well, why don't we finally get into this film for our friends, Brennan?
do it.
So just a kind of a quick review. Remember, this is the direct sequel to number 3 and 2, technically. So
Directed by Leonard Nimoy.
Yes, directed by Leonard Nimoy for a second time.
Mhm.
We open up on the planet. Well, we don't open up quite a way. A probe actually is coming through space, and it's letting out this weird signal that disrupts all power grids everywhere and shuts everything down, creating nothing but chaos. And it's working its way towards Earth.
Yeah.
And we don't know what this is or what this sound equals. We've no idea. Meanwhile, then we open up on planet Vulcan, where we know that the Enterprise crew is going to take the now aptly named the Botany Bay, the hijacked Krug.
The Bounty.
The Bounty. I say the Botany Bay. You know how many times I do that? It's the B. It's the B, and both are great historic vessels. But anyway.
Yes.
The Bounty.
The HMS Bounty.
Mutiny on the Bounty. Let's try that again. The Bounty.
I like that.
Anyway, they take the Bounty. Yeah, we talk about how literature has a major part in Star Trek all the time. Just another moment of literature kicking in.
Oh, Kirk and Picard, right? They love
they just talk Shakespeare. That's all they do. That's all they do.
Oh yeah.
Anyway,
Two cities.
But we are introduced to Spock, who's reacclimating to his body and his mind reunified, and he's taking this test on Vulcan to really test and make sure everything is, status quo. And the final question that he gets from this computer is, "How are you feeling?" And he doesn't understand.
How do you feel?
How do you feel? He doesn't understand the question. And his mother comes in and basically tells him, "Look, you're human and Vulcan. How you feel is relevant," but he doesn't understand the question. He doesn't get it. The crew decides to go ahead and go back, leaving behind Lieutenant Savick. And so as they fly out, they get an emergency distress signal from Starfleet saying, "Stay away from Earth. Everything is powering down. We're in a lot of trouble here. Do not come. You will not survive." And Kirk asks them to put kind of the sound of this probe on. And Spock, by some reason, I don't know how he does it, is able to quickly discern that the probe sounds are whale calls. Specifically, humpback whales. And they're like, "What is going on? Can we respond back?" Well, sure, we could respond back, but it would be gibberish. We don't know what whales say.
Humpbacks are extinct.
Humpbacks are extinct in the future. And so, in order to save the galaxy once again, Kirk says, begin your calculations for time warp, which is time number how much that Kirk has gone back in time?
Oh my word, you watch the original series. It's crazy.
It's a Star Trek drinking game by now.
It's tomorrow is yesterday and that kind of.
Yeah.
So in the original series, which I have never seen,
Mhm.
apologies, Kirk and co have traveled back in time many times.
Many times.
And one of them using the same technique.
Using this technique, yes.
As going around the sun. And
going around the okay.
Yep.
Hey, if it works, I mean, do it. Okay, very cool.
But they do. They managed to go back in time to 1986, San Francisco, and they discover they land in Golden Gate Park, and they begin looking. They need to find whales. Gotta find whales, but we have other problems. They need more fuel, and so they send Uhura and Chekhov to find the nuclear vessels, because the isotopes from a nuclear accelerating vessel could be used to repolarize the dilithium crystals, Trekkie stuff.
Yeah.
And then Bones and Scotty have to go build a container to house these whales. So everybody's kind of out doing their own thing. Kirk and Spock make their way to Sausalito to the Cetacean Institute, where they
More
find.
on that in a minute.
Oh, we will get there. The Cetacean Institute, home of George and Gracie, the only two captive humpback whales in existence that are being studied and monitored. And Spock decides to jump in and do a mind meld with a whale. Didn't know you could do that, but hey, it works.
Love it.
And finds out that she is very pregnant. The female is pregnant. And Kirk and them say, these are them. These are the whales we need. But they meet Dr. Jillian Taylor, who is kind of their keeper, and doesn't really like people jumping into the tank to hang with whales. But for some reason chases them down and invites them to Italian dinner. Anyway, so they go to dinner and Kirk kind of spills, we need these whales, and he tells the truth, but he teases about it. She doesn't believe him, that he's, a spaceman from Iowa, but manages to find out that the whales are leaving tomorrow. So they only have basically 24 hours to get the whales and get out before they lose them entirely. Meanwhile, nuclear vessels is happening. And they make their way, Chekhov and Uhura make their way over to Alameda, where they successfully get the isotopes that they need, but due to radiation interference, they only can beam out one at a time. Uhura beams out first, and then Chekhov is caught by the U.S. Navy and begins a chase, leaving behind technology. We'll get there. And jumps off of the deck of a carrier pretty far down and cracks his head open. And he's brought to the hospital. Meanwhile, Scotty and Bones manage to find a place that can make the material that they need. They cheat a little time travel and give this formula to make it, and they start constructing this material to make the vessel.
Best scene with the computer ever.
Hello, computer. We'll get there.
Hello,
But Uhura reports there's a problem with Chekhov, and they discover that Chekhov is in the hospital and they need to get him now because he's going to be going in for surgery. So they infiltrate the hospital and manage to get Chekhov out of there, heal him, and beam out to the bounty. And pretty much everybody gets ready to go. They're gonna go, and they discover the whales are already gone. The whales were released the night before, and so they have to get inside the vessel and go chase down these whales out in the Bering Straits.
Yes.
And they do make it out there and beam them up, including the water, and kind of a funny scene with the whaling vessels that are out there. But they manage to leave, slingshot around the sun, and go back. And crash land in the San Francisco Bay, releasing the whales. The whales communicate with the probe, and then everything's all better. Or is it? Because as we said, this is a continuation. And in the last movie, Kirk defied orders in order to save Spock. So Kirk and his crew have to face charges against Starfleet. And for saving everyone, basically all the charges are dropped against everybody except one, and that's directed solely at Kirk, and that's disobeying a direct order. And Kirk, who is an admiral, is told that for his actions, he will be demoted to captain. Since that's the only job in Starfleet, he seems to be able to do really well. And they are taken away to another vessel, to meet. They're going to be in a new vessel, and we find out that it is another Constitution ship, and it is the Enterprise A. And our heroes boldly go again where no one has gone before. Star Trek V. Anyway.
We'll get there.
We will get there. So, Reilly, we want to start with you.
Yeah.
What are some things in this film that you like?
some things. I love everything about this movie. And I'll tell you something. In 1986, when I watched this movie, this wasn't anchored to anything Star Trek. This wasn't anchored to anything kind of that I had previously known. The reason I love this movie so much because it is actually a really good movie, right? Just take it outside of the Star Trek. I thought it had a great inciting incident with the weird aliens that are coming in and saying, we're going to basically destroy everything without saying it. We don't know. And it, puts everything to,
The creator was the
SHIT.
teacher.
Yeah, it's just bad news bears. And I think it's a tried and true tested kind of formula, especially when you're coming a year after Back to the Future, that, time travel is a kind of a fun thing in the 80s when done well. And we got Leonard Nimoy doing this. Everything was charming. One of my favorite things that really held up on rewatch, and I want you guys to help me out on this because I think this character came back, but the time on the bus in San Francisco with Spock and Shatner, or
Mhm.
Leonard Nimoy and Shatner, and then the punk guy with
The
the
punk, yeah.
Yes.
The punk on the bus.
it was just when he uses the mind. I mean, the
Neck
Vulcan, the neck pinch. It's a really fun scene, and just I think that right there is kind of the heart of the movie because then it connects to me. Because then I loved going back because this movie that introduced me to Star Trek had all these nuggets in it of like, wait a minute, we can talk spoilers too, right? I mean, of previous
yeah.
movies. Yeah.
The movie
Spock
that came out
died?
36 years ago, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm assuming so. Spock died. He in Wrath of Khan, he comes back in search for Spock, like, and then this is his like reacclimation into the world, not only in his body and his story, but to the fans that thought they lost him. And then, I think it works. I don't know what Star Trek fans everywhere think of the death of Spock at that time, but that was fascinating to me. So this movie branched me out to other Star Trek movies, truly, because the mythology is really there, and it's a really great mythology. And I'm coming as a Star Wars guy, that Vader is Luke's father, and oh my God, is Han Solo gonna survive? And he could have died at one point, and which we get later on. But you know what I'm talking about? I think that it just really had a great mythology to it. And then the humor was pitch perfect. When you branch out, I love that the whole crew had assignments. They had to go and do things. And then you have your favorite Star Trek characters all in fish out of water scenarios, and that's what's so fascinating to watch. You have Chekhov, having to deal with not only his injury, but then those like little moments of like computer, where he's, and they're on this mission to go find things, and and they're gonna have to go in there and do these, right? Chekhov was in the nuclear.
Chekhov was the nuclear vessel. Scotty was the hello computer.
Scotty was the hello computer, and Scotty was so amazing, and the picking up, what's her name? That's the Earthling that decides to join them.
Jillian Taylor.
Yeah,
Jillian Taylor. She was fantastic, and one of my favorite scenes is her standing next to Scotty as they're going, and it's just like classic Scotty as they're getting out of there. It's like, I give it all, I can't, Captain. But have we talked about too how interesting it is that they have a birds of prey Klingon ship, right? Is that what I'm?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That to me is fascinating to have. Not only is it fish out of water for the crew in 1986 San Francisco, they're effing fish out of water in their own vessel. They don't even have the Enterprise. So, and they don't even have Spock is not even in his correct vessel yet. He's walking around. So the juxtaposition and the kind of the parallel kind of themes we have going here of the crew being outside of their ship of choice, the Enterprise, Spock being outside of his body at one point and having to be back in his body, and then all of them outside of their time frame. It's a really pitch perfect, delicate, fine line walking there, and Nimoy just nails it. So I like all of this movie. But I think the bus really stands out to me, and I love some of the invisible.
It's a good start. It's definitely a good start to look at, and you're right. They do bring him back in season 2 of Picard. He does
The
make
guy,
it
the punk, right?
yeah, the punk comes
Yeah.
back. Now here's
Or
the
it could
funny
be
thing.
his son. Could be his son.
I don't think so, because what he knew with the neck pick, like, no, I'll turn it off. He knew it's the same guy, and it was the same
Same
actor
guy.
too.
Oh,
But
yeah,
here's the
okay.
thing that's funny to me.
Oh,
Let's
yeah,
assume
Kirk
that he's a
Thatcher.
teenager
Kirk
in
Thatcher.
1986. Let's just say he's like 17, 18.
Yeah.
40 years later, he's still rocking the same look in 2025 in
Yeah.
Picard. I love that. This guy is
Yep,
great.
Kirk
Nostalgia.
Thatcher. He is he's one of the crewmen who worked on the movie.
Mhm.
Got to play this neat little part.
Nice.
Yes. But I also love Spock coming into his own again. Like
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
a kid having to relearn everything. And Spock trying to learn how to be an earthling in a real crash course is so funny.
Yeah.
You know,
especially
the
going
whole
back in time.
the whole hell yes we do. You know, his swearing.
The colorful,
Colorful
metaphors.
metaphors.
Mhm.
It's so great, and the chemistry too is at its best in this film with Spock and Kirk.
Mm-hmm.
Do you like Italian? Yes. No. Yes. Yes.
It really is. It's a wonderful kind of like, Shatner at his Shatnerous, I
Mhm.
think. Kind of trying to
Mhm.
convince Spock again, like what it is to be human.
Mhm.
It's really great to watch. Their dynamic is fantastic. They're by now we're 4 movies in, and they're going, and I don't know, I can't remember, but is this a big box office hit? It has to be.
Yes,
It made
was, I believe.
133 million at the box office out
There you
on a
go.
budget
Big hit.
of 26 million.
Yeah, big hit.
1986, that's
hit.
huge numbers back then.
Mhm.
That's a good number, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I love it.
He's nominated for 4 Academy Awards.
Nominated
cinema-
for
Best
okay
cinematography, best
cinematography.
sound,
I love that. Okay.
best sound editing,
Special
and best
effects.
original score.
Oh, score. Okay, wait. oh, is it Goldsmith again?
So I didn't win any of them. The winners in the categories were
It's
were
Leonard
beat-
Rosenman.
they were beat for cinematography
Okay.
by the movie The Mission.
Oh yeah, The Mission.
Yep.
Okay.
They were beat for best sound by Platoon,
Okay. Platoon.
best sound editing by Aliens,
Wow.
and best score by Around Midnight by Herbie Hancock. So that score no one remembers.
Yeah.
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 No
It's
offense
someone.
to Herbie Hancock, but this is the most Oscar-nominated Star Trek film.
Oh, I love that. That's a good that's a good fun fact.
I
Yeah.
also, being that Brennan and I from the Bay, I love that this is close to home.
Yeah.
Like, I love seeing things, and I grew up in San Jose in the 1980s.
That's where I live.
Yeah, well, that's where Brennan lives.
Mhm.
So a lot of these places that they show here, I recognize. I clearly
Yeah.
do, which is why the Cetacean Institute is so cool to me, because I visited. It is played by the Monterey Bay Aquarium, which is one of the largest aquariums this side of the Mississippi.
Which I was just at a couple of months ago.
And
There you
it's
go.
something that I go to regularly, and it had opened up only a few months prior to the filming of this. As a matter of fact, the studio donated a large amount of money to finish construction on the deal that they could film here with this.
Mhm.
Oh, I like that. That's fun.
No, and it really is. And let me tell you,
Now,
there
in the
aren't a lot of
movie, they move it to Sausalito,
Oh,
which is
that
just
right?
Which is,
across
of
the Bay
course,
Bridge,
which is
Okay.
across the
or
bridge.
the Golden Gate. Excuse me, Golden Gate
In
Bridge.
fact, there is a composite shot of the San Francisco skyline in the background of the aquarium. Obviously, that's not what you see when you go to the aquarium.
No, they are actually. It's what is it, about 100 miles away by then when you get down to Monterey?
Yeah, it takes about that long. Yeah.
couple hours. But yeah, it plays its own
About an
part in
hour
this,
and
which is
15
really
minutes from here.
cool. And so when I see this filming, I just love Riley, have you ever played the game as a movie fan where you want to go find places in films that were locations and you want to sit in that and recreate that perfect shot, that perfect
yeah.
moment?
Oh
For
yeah.
me, with the aquarium in this film, it's this.
I've done that a
Yeah.
few times actually.
Yes.
Yeah. One of my bucket list things is to finally go to Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah.
You know,
Done
and
it.
see
Yeah.
Jaws. I've never been
no.
able to go back there, and I would love to do that.
Now you see, there's the crossover we have missed. For Star Trek V. Star Trek V, the whales meet Jaws.
I mean,
Mm.
I think that we could do something like kind of nostalgia, you know, when we're always revisiting, you know, it's like, you know, Halloween, we're right around the corner. It's like, oh yeah, 30 years later, we forget all those other movies. And it's like, let's do Star Trek 5 and forget all the other one. Oh, wait a minute. That would really piss off fans, I think. No, because I was thinking, what if instead of the whales, they come back to Martha's Vineyard and they have to capture a great white shark?
Now
I
now
love
you're
it.
And they
talking. Now you're
recruit Brody, and Brody has to be there, and Brody is just minding his business, and it's like,
yeah, but you forget a witch doctor has possessed the shark.
oh, we're getting in some Jaws of Revenge stuff
Yeah.
here. Oh
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. No, true to the form of some of these nostalgia picks, we're gonna ignore the events of 3 and 4 in the Jaws universe, and we're just gonna pick up with Brody alive.
Yeah.
For our listeners, Mark Reilly is one of the biggest Jaws fans. in
Ah, it's my
history.
favorite movie of
Yes.
all time.
So
Oh, yeah.
whenever we can make a Jaws reference, it's gonna happen.
I'm gonna jump at it.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I absolutely love the location shooting in this film. I don't
Yeah.
normally say that. I'm like, who really pays attention? But being a local, I love this. I just love going, I've been there. I see, I know. It's
I know where that
really
is. I know where that is.
Yeah.
Well, it's a big part of of this movie. It's a character itself, you know, and I think that's what I loved about this movie. And, you know, it reminded me, and I remember my mother took us up north, you know, kind of visiting some of the spots along the coast, and then landing in San Francisco. And I just remember kind of putting those 2 and 2s together and being like, that's San Francisco. That's cool.
And
This is
seeing the
really
Golden
fun
Gate
seeing it.
Bridge, which is a regular character
Sure.
in the
And
Star
so
Trek
much.
universe.
Right. You know, when they're going back into the future, well, not back to the future, but
Well, they do at the end.
I
The
think
second time Christopher Lloyd's vehicle gets used to go back to the future.
there you go.
it's true.
Oh, that's right.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, the comedy is spot on in this. The
Oh my
locations are
word.
great.
Yes.
And the effects for 1986 work for me. They do.
Yeah.
It's very light on special effects.
Yeah, you're right. It is, but yet when you think of like the shots to get the whales and basically
yeah.
anything involving the whales, the
Best
traveling,
remote
the
control
I
whales.
love
Especially at the end there, the ship coming back underneath the Golden
Oh,
Gate Bridge.
yes.
It
Yeah.
had some of that 80s flavor to it
The-
that it holds up for me. The mats in the back. I mean, it's like, you
Mhm.
know, it's kind
the
of
actual time jump too does something that I love, and they do this strange kind of melding effect with the faces of the crew that I still kind of like. It's very primitive, but I like it a lot.
Mhm.
Yes, and we made mention of it. This score, Brennan, what
Yes.
can we say about this score?
Leonard Rosenman's score is different, yet just so much fun. It's got that big, kind of mysterious, aquatic sound, but then it also has like that streets of San Francisco in the 80s jazz. And then that silly chase scene in the hospital. It's got so many flavors to the score.
So I'm a scores guy, and I forgot about this one. And I mean, to be honest, like I couldn't on my rewatch, I was just kind of like coming back into the story and the characters and the direction, you know, and the score kind of reminded me. I think I missaid, is that a word? But Jerry Goldsmith is one of the is the composers. Now let me Let me try to get some of my knowledge. Is James Horner Wrath of Khan?
Yes.
Okay. And Goldsmith did the first one and part 3
Part 5.
and part 5. Who did part 3 in this one?
James Horner.
No, James Horner did part 3 and
2
then
and 3.
he did 2 and 3. Got it. Okay. So we have a new composer coming in right now.
Yeah,
For
Leonard
part
Rosen.
4.
Right.
Yeah. That I'm not familiar with their work. So we have a new composer now, though, that comes in. That's interesting. Okay.
So to
I
give
wanted
you
to
an
get my
idea,
Star Trek composers correct.
give
here.
you an idea of this gentleman, Leonard Rosenman. This is a guy who's been in the industry a long time. He was
Sure.
the composer of East of Eden, Rebel Without a Cause,
Oh, okay.
The Fantastic Voyage,
Huge.
Battle
Huge.
for the Planet of the Apes, Beneath the Planet of the Apes.
Huge name that I had no idea. I feel
He did the
horrible.
animated Lord of the Rings.
He did the
Oh
animated.
my
Lord of the Rings.
God. Okay. Jesus.
Like this is the guy. This is one of the composers.
Down for Glory.
We always joke too.
We have already established that I majorly messed up here.
in
Barry
in
Lyndon.
No.
Barry
Should've-
Lyndon.
in Schmodown
Already established, Brendan. Okay.
in Schmodown terminology, we always joke that anytime it's a composer question, it's one of the big four. This is not one of the big four.
He also did Barry Lyndon.
Yeah.
Ronnie Ned.
I
You're like,
mean,
oh yeah,
come on.
RoboCop 2.
Oh boy.
Irvin Kershner coming back here.
Hell is
the,
for heroes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, this was the only Star Trek film he did, but it's so different, and I do like that. And one of the things that Rosenman wanted to do was make sure that this did not sound like any of the other Star Trek films, and that was on purpose because
Makes sense.
we are not in the Star Trek universe. And when you think
No.
about it, they come back to 1986.
Right.
There's no Starfleet. There's no
They haven't
Federation.
discovered warp.
Yeah.
Right? That's first contact later.
They're all worried about the Cold War. That's what they're up to.
I know my
Absolutely.
Star Trek. Gosh darn it. Okay.
Yes. So, overall, I mean, this is also a really great gateway, as you've discovered, Mark Reilly, into the
Yeah.
world of Star Trek.
I discovered that as well.
It is not offensive.
Yeah.
Like you can watch this and it's a great science fiction film. Yeah, a little bit of backstory would help, but it's not a killer. It isn't a killer to it.
Yeah.
How many sequels can you say can do that successfully?
Especially on the 4th movie. Come
I
on.
know, right?
Yeah. We think of 4th movies and franchises now. I mean, usually they're not, they're not up to snuff. We were talking about Jaws, the 4th movie in that franchise. Is Jaws the Revenge? Good Lord.
With
Please.
Michael Caine.
Yeah. Do not watch that movie. So, for this movie to be as good as it is, and I think it actually lends credence to the some of that fun online banter that you get when you consider that they go Star Trek, the even movies are the better movies. You know what I mean? And it's like, I don't buy that because I love part 3.
Yeah.
But you can't you can't do that until you get to Star Trek 4. You have to start establishing a pattern here.
Mm-hmm.
So Star Trek 4 needed to really enhance that. Well, we weren't there yet in 86, but in 86, believe me, to get that 4th movie, as good as it is, it's like, damn, we're on to something right now.
In my house, this might be the 2nd or 3rd most quoted movie.
Yeah.
We're quoting this movie all the time.
What's your first, would you say?
Oh, Princess Bride
Oh, okay.
is very quotable. The Emperor's New Groove is also very quotable.
Okay. Yeah.
You mean the
That's-
poison to kill Cusco? Cusco's poison?
That's fun.
It's extract of lava.
Ah,
But Star Trek 4 has so many great lines like Alameda or nuclear vessels.
double dumbass on you.
Yeah. Or, the whole thing about colorful metaphors. And places
Yes.
like everybody remember where we parked.
Where are you from? Outer
My
space?
mom
No, I'm
always
from
says that.
Iowa.
Yeah.
I love that.
My mom is always like, everybody remember where we parked.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
And this is a very quotable movie with some of the most fun dialogue.
See, I love, Brendan, that you say it's quotable, it's up there, and you bring up like all these movies, and it kind of goes to my original point. And it's like I had no Star Trek love or knowledge going into this movie, and it just stood on its own. And talk about the 80s too. There's something to be said about, and I remember in doing my research coming in here, guys, like looking at the posters that came out for that thing when you put it in, you look at the images. This movie came to be because of finally for me, it was one of the poster designs. My favorite memories always was with my dad going to this ma and pa old shop before there were Blockbuster videos, and he had all the VHS covers out. So that's great for a horror fan like me. It's great for
Yes.
like, science fiction fan like me, because those posters and those designs end up on the VHS cover, and that's what sells you at that time. And I remember seeing it being like, okay, because there's so many times we mentioned Jaws. Okay, I'm going to grab Jaws and Jaws 2. And I remember grabbing Superman, and I remember grabbing Amityville 3D because of the
Oh
hand.
my word.
I remember grabbing that as a horror guy. But then, seeing
Oh,
the
yeah,
silhouette of the birds of prey kind of
Yeah.
ship against the silhouette of the Golden Gate Bridge with
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now.
Is
looking
it
at
Drew
it right now.
Struzan? I can't remember. But then this idea that it's really, it was fascinating to me. And I remember that was another big reason I'm going after it, because of also the chatter of the nerds like me, when you're playing with your friends in the neighborhood, which I grew up in a great neighborhood where we all had that conversation. I think it was Robbie Brubaker. I want to say it's Robbie Brubaker that introduced me to Star Trek down the street from me.
Nice.
Nice.
Can you stop here, please? My dog, Brody, Chief Brody. Yeah, he's under my chair right now.
It's
Oh,
cute,
honey.
such a cute puppy. But a perfect Star Trek movie, this is not.
Oh, how dare
Yes,
How dare you,
I
sir?
I will say it. There are a few things I have a flaw with. I
you?
have a
Okay,
problem.
let's talk.
I do. Now, again, I
Now,
complimented
mind
the
you,
use.
you are talking to two men who will live and die by defending the Last Jedi. So let's see what you got here.
This is absolutely 100% truth,
Oh well.
which is not
Um,
lost on me, Brendan, that I see that poster in the background and I appreciate it. If I
Yes.
flip my camera around, you'd see my poster over there in the corner.
So let's hear what you have to say, Captain, sir.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
Before
I
you,
just
we declare you
Perfect
unfit
movie,
for duty.
please.
I just complimented their use of scenery, and I do. I think it's absolutely great. Their locations are fabulous. My problem is that
Get ready to throw them in the brig, Mark.
I have been to the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and their use of the aquarium is egregious when you go to this place. First of all, here's the thing. When we see the shot of the whales, we first see the whales, they're held in this outdoor tank, which when you finally see how big this area is, it's a tiny space. It is not that big. They're tide pools. And I kind of get it for what they're doing. They show the water way higher than it ever actually really goes. They make it look like it's literally sitting on the water when actually the Monterey Bay Aquarium is, would you say, Brendan, probably be a good 15, 20 feet off off floor level? So it's actually a lot higher than it is.
The deck.
And
there,
so
yeah.
when I look at it, especially being there in a local, I can peg at it and go, wait a second, that's not realistic at all. And for a local like me, it took it away just a little bit. And then as they paste this film together in editing, their entrances and exits are from totally separate parts of the building. So I'm like, wait a second, you can't do that. I mean, here's the thing.
This is the Cetacean Institute.
It doesn't make it a bad film. It's a little thing that makes me go, wait a second. And when you've been there, it kind of takes me out of it a little bit sometimes because I've been there so many times and I love that place passionately.
Allow me to retort.
Go ahead.
I've been there too.
Allow me to retort.
I've been there too.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't take me out of it.
Mm.
But I respect that it takes you out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I love seeing the aquarium, and I'm gonna give me a second. I'm gonna plug this aquarium. It is an amazing place that families should experience. You learn a lot there. Again, it's one of the largest, most famous aquariums this side of the Mississippi. No joke.
We have
Uh,
taken my nephews and nieces probably 5 times to the
I
aquarium.
recommend it. It's expensive, but you got to understand what they put into this and what they're showing and the things they're able to see here that you're never going to be
Oh,
able
the
to
deep
see in
sea
other.
area is so
Yeah, it's a fabulous experience, and I highly recommend. Please support your local aquarium, support your
Yeah,
local zoos.
100%.
These places are so
and
important.
support the ecology of the ocean.
Yes, and
The
that's
movie does a really good job of pointing
this
that out.
does, except it hits you overhead just a little hard with it
Well,
multiple
it was
times.
the 80s.
True. And that's something I don't like about it. Is that this is the Greenpeace one? It very much is.
This is the don't do drugs era.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Well,
so
we hit you over the head a
look,
little bit.
as somebody growing up right at that time, we needed a good, lecture every now and again. We were running around in backyards and stuff without parental supervision.
yes.
I mean, that's a lot of the 80s were like, honey, have you seen Superman 2? The kids at Niagara Falls.
Yeah.
Hey, mom, watch. Honey, that's nice. That's a snapshot of the 80s parenting
and
right
as
there.
far as we were with drugs and the ecology of the earth, and we needed the kick in the pants back then.
We sure did.
It does.
So it's a little over the top.
The only other thing I have issue with this film is the hospital sequence rescuing Chekhov.
Oh,
I get the comedic elements that they throw into that, but it feels like in the end it was just thrown in there to have one more conflict challenge kind of thing. And
Yeah,
it just doesn't
fair.
feel like it's needed. It feels like, all right, we got to do one more thing. It just doesn't feel needed to me. It feels to me like the last thing they threw in there. I don't know if that's true.
That's a fair observation.
And it kind of comes off boring. It really, like, what's the point? What's the risk? Although,
It does create some funny lines.
the old lady on dialysis with the pills. I love that old lady, and I want to know what she has. I'd like to know what pill regenerates a liver that fast.
When Jillian climbs on the table and pretends to be needing surgery, and Dr. McCoy describes her symptoms, he's just using the technical word for cramps. That is hilarious.
Yeah, no, and the writing for that is good. It's still, the whole sequence still feels like
it just feels like maybe it's in the wrong place.
We're stretching it a little bit. I think they were trying to stretch the film, and they just needed one more conflict, something to give us something. Do you have any issues with this film, Brennan?
Attention all hands. The commander has declared your captain unfit for duty. No, not really. I think that if you wanted to, you could always nitpick the time travel and say, well, if it's that easy, why doesn't everybody at Starfleet do that? But let's just be clear. They did that in the original series, and it's a matter of you gotta do what works for the story.
Right.
No,
But we
other
can
than
connect
that,
this. We can connect it to the greater Star Trek universe to
Yes,
answer that question.
but other than that, I think that this movie is one of those that is not flawless, but has, in my opinion, no major flaws that prevent it from being a really good movie.
Yeah.
And it is one of those movies that's it's just fun.
It's interesting hearing you both talk about it. Now, let me ask you a question. You can ask me that question. Do I have any flaws, or do I see any flaws in, like, let's say a Return of the Jedi, right? The third movie in my favorite space saga, right? And maybe a casual moviegoer on the outside just loves the hell out of that movie. And that's kind of where I am with part 4 here. Now, when you are both going into it like that, your love of Star Trek Is it where you're looking a little bit more like, are you holding it up to now? Because I'm curious, what are some of your favorite Star Trek movies?
This
The
is
best
my
of the best. The best of the best.
This is my second favorite Star Trek.
Okay. I love that. What's your first?
Wrath of Khan.
Wrath of Khan. Engel.
Third
Six.
is First Contact.
6 is my absolute favorite.
It's a good
Six
choice.
is.
It's a good
It
choice.
is. First Contact would be my second.
Yeah. First
Yeah.
Contact's
And then
amazing.
Wrath of Khan, and a close fourth is 2009. Star
Yes,
Trek.
the 2009 Star Trek is really good. Too.
Yes.
Yeah, I would say that Wrath of Khan is probably my favorite Star Trek movie now.
Yep.
Now that I can appreciate, film and where we stand and pop
Mhm.
culture and all the things that go into making a movie. But the rest in no particular order. First Contact is up there. This one is up there. I love Generations.
Yep, I love it too. I really
I
do.
like Generations a lot.
It's not going to crack my top 5, but it might be up at 6 or 7.
Those are the ones that really stand out to me, to be honest with you. And Part 3. The ones that I can remember having effect on me
Part 3 deserves more love.
was in no particular order. Again, if we're establishing Wrath of Khan as the kind of the numero uno, that's my favorite. But Voyage Home, Generations, Search for Spock, First Contact, especially First Contact is
It's so
probably
good.
up there. Probably up there in the top 3, I would say.
So good.
Yeah. Yeah. That was like one of those movies that I was like, whoa, that's good.
Mhm.
That's good. Again, you got to work, and apology, and I mean no offense to Star Trek fans, but because of my love of Star Wars and because of my love of movies, Star Trek, you got to work extra hard to get me to care, I think.
Yeah.
And like, so First Contact comes around and I'm like, whoa, that's a good movie. You know what
And
I
that's
mean?
really great that you say that. And we will in a few months get to First Contact. Actually, I think into the new year.
I
I've
cannot
never
wait.
But
seen
the
it, and
thing
like,
with-
wow, it's good.
The thing with First Contact is, which is interesting, that works against it, and yet it's still a good movie, is that to really understand the motivation and backstory, you had to have watched Next Generation to know
Correct? Yeah.
why all the motivations happen. I
Yeah.
mean, we get exposition, but to truly get into it, you need to watch the show. And even when you don't watch the show, it's still that good.
And Star
that's
Trek
me.
4 does the same thing.
I thank you, Brendan. I think that was exactly going to be my point. When you have a movie that can kind of lay you in for the layman's like me that aren't going to know some of the history of the TV series, because I think we're ultimately going to get there with Star Wars. We're going to have some things that are going to mean something in a movie that comes out that you maybe had to see Mandalorian or Ahsoka season whatever, right? But I think that's fascinating to consider in First Contact and even Voyage Home. If you're telling me there was some time travel that I wasn't even involved with those series, I have not seen a single Star Trek TV episode. Maybe First Generation, maybe Next Generation. I remember the credits, but I never got into it. The movies were my thing. So fascinating. I just see that. I see that kind of connection in the Star Trek world of First Contact having that kind of mythological connection to the the source material and the TV show, but then Voyage Home.
And Voyage Home is sort of the third
Great.
chapter of a trilogy.
Right. It's interesting.
Brennan, let's this will have to be definitely be our section here. How does this affect the Star Trek world universe as a whole?
Well, first off, we see our first female captain in Star Trek. Captain of the Saratoga is the first woman we see as a captain of the starship. Obviously, Janeway, later down the line,
that's right,
is the most iconic Star Trek captain. Is a woman. You also have this. This movie connects to the original series in terms of the time travel mechanic. in terms of Spock and his dad kind of having a reconciliation,
Mm.
because he says at the end of the movie, I opposed you joining Starfleet, and I was mistaken.
Mm.
But we also see a new Enterprise, Enterprise A, which would feature in the next two adventures.
Mhm.
We also see Admiral Kirk, Captain Kirk again. We also see the punk on the bus, which we will see again in Picard, which is great.
Mm.
And also this idea of, we've seen this in Star Trek a few times, where an extraterrestrial will be on Earth at a time when there are no extraterrestrials and have to figure out a way to hide. Kind of like the Vulcans in that one episode of Voyager,
Mm.
where they were on Earth in Colorado in the 50s.
Oh, it was Enterprise. That was Enterprise.
Enterprise, and they had to hide.
Carbon Creek.
for-
I remember that one.
And you also had things like Spock regaining a sense of himself. But Spock would appear in many other movies in the franchise, as well as on the Next Generation, which is really cool. And also seeing Sarek, Spock's dad, would also appear
Mm.
on the TV shows, which is really neat.
Yes.
And there's so much more I could say about how this connects. Those are the ones that really stood out to me.
I got to mention my man Brock Peters, who is a Star Trek legend. This is the
Admiral
first
Cartwright,
appearance
yes.
of Brock Peters as Admiral Cartwright, who has a big role to play in Star Trek 6. And Brock Peters would go on to play Ben Sisko's father in Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, that's right, Joseph Sisko.
And so,
And also, may I add the great Brock Peters?
Mhm.
If you're out there listening, if you're one of our younger listeners, go and check out the movie To Kill a Mockingbird.
Mm.
Brock Peters gives a powerhouse performance in that movie
as Tom Robinson.
as a wrongly convicted black man in the 50s.
Yes.
Well, the movie takes place in the 30s, actually. If you want to see some real good acting, watch the scene where he takes the stand. Brock
Very
Peters
hard.
is a legend.
Yeah.
And getting to see Admiral Cartwright for the first time,
Mhm.
who would later play an interesting role in Star Trek 6.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A couple of other important cameos. Grace Lee Whitney
Yeah.
as Janice Rand
Janice
returning.
Rand.
Actually, the funny thing is Grace Lee Whitney was in almost all of the original series films. And a
Yes.
lot of it we just would have missed it. But Janice Rand was in there. And Janice Rand, for those of you who don't know, was the yeoman for Kirk under Kirk's first 5-year mission.
Who kind of had a thing for Captain Kirk.
A little bit.
Who doesn't?
And then, of course, also there at Starfleet headquarters, and I'm sure you were going to mention this, Nurse Chapel.
True. Dr. Chapel.
Nurse Chapel, Dr.
Dr.
Chapel.
Chapel. Absolutely.
Dr. Chapel is there as well.
Yes. All right. Well,
Also, we get to see the Federation as a president.
mhm.
This is the first time we ever saw that in Star Trek.
What was if you have to pick one favorite moment from this film,
Oh,
what would it be? Reilly, start with you.
Favorite moment?
Could be a quote, scene, could just anything from this film that absolutely stands out to you as just like, this is my favorite thing about this film.
Well, I think I said it was the them on the bus going around, Shatner and Nimoy just at full strength at that point with like their timing, their friendship, their that far in the story with these characters.
discussions of profanity.
It was a deep moment, and I said it was kind of the heart of the film. I felt at least maybe the heart for the relationship with Spock and Kirk. I just adore that, and I think that's cheating to go back there. When you're asking me favorite moments, maybe not. But I also love. I think it's a fantastic climax of action and fun. Um, to consider the last, I would say, 15 minutes of this movie,
Mhm.
20 minutes of this movie to get the whales to have that kind of the all hope is lost kind of moment where we have everything we need, and then they're out there in the Pacific, and we got to go iconic against the Golden Gate Bridge in a Klingon ship, no less.
Yeah.
You know, um, and then the race, against time, the ticking clock, to get back in time to save the world. The climax works really well. Love that.
Awesome.
Brennan?
Well, I got one that I think is fascinating is when George the whale talks to the probe at the end.
Oh, that's
No,
right.
no subtitles.
Yeah.
We just hear the whale call.
Uh-huh.
And we see it cuts back and forth between
And then
him and
comes
the
back
probe.
in. Yeah.
And they're talking to each other.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating.
That's
In
a good
fact,
moment.
George angles himself down in the water and the probe copies his move.
Mm-hmm.
They're
Which
in
is
synchronization.
which naturally is what a whale would do. With a lot of whale calls, you will see them when we look at footage, they angle themselves down,
Yeah.
which is interesting. And they're able to basically bounce off of the surface and it's able to travel farther. It's a very strange thing,
But
but I think it's cool.
my number one favorite moment is when Spock tells his dad, "Tell mother I feel fine."
Hmm.
That is the culmination of Spock's journey to rediscover himself
Hmm.
in this movie.
I like that.
And that's kind of the spine of the movie. It's at the beginning, Spock doesn't understand the idea. Yeah, how do you feel? He doesn't know what the answer. But then by the end, he
Moment.
gets it. He understands it.
Yeah.
And I love that moment between him and his dad. It's a sweet moment.
Yeah.
It's a reconciliation between the two of them.
I think for me, the very ending of the film, as they're coming up on the Enterprise and Kirk says,
Mm.
"Gentlemen, we've come home."
Yeah. It's good.
And you
moment.
see the dun da da dun da 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 da. You
Got
get
the
you get
ship
the whole
back.
fanfare.
Wrong
and-
music. Wrong music.
Yeah.
Oh, da 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 da. It always. We talked about this 2 weeks ago. That to me, that is the Star Trek theme.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, but let's see what she's got, and they take her out again. And I always love those hopeful shots in almost every Star Trek film of them taking the Enterprise out for the first time.
Mm.
Hmm.
And I just,
Right.
we don't get it till the end of this film, but gosh, it feels satisfying
Mhm.
just to see that slick, beautiful ship coming out of dock and just heading out there. I love it.
Yes.
All right. Well, final thoughts, Riley.
Oh, I think this is a fantastic movie. All the things we discussed, but like I said, I think the strength of this movie is it is the gateway drug for the Star Trek movie lover. You know what I mean? It is that movie that got me into the franchise. It is a movie that still stands out because it's one of those. I would say this and Wrath of Khan are my two, but like now I got to watch First Contact again. I haven't thought about that in a while, but it's those movies that like, especially Part 4 for me as an 80s fan of movies that grew up at that time. This is that movie in the franchise of Star Trek that I would probably go back to the most. It's so damn enjoyable. And on the rewatch, I was just smiling. It's a good
Mhm.
movie. And I just love that Nimoy directed this and that his legacy still stands and that he is just forever known as Spock, but I mean he is just so damn talented.
Indeed, you do.
Brennan, final thoughts.
If you were to make a list of like movies that are iconic of the 80s, movies that just
Yeah.
say 80s, this is
Yeah.
one of them.
Correct.
This is a fun movie. This is a movie that I cannot recommend enough to people. This is like Riley said, a gateway. And it's so Star Trek, but not Star Trek at the same time.
Yeah.
And that is like just so great. It's so great. And I think that this movie is the most fun Star Trek movie, I think, just pure fun.
Yeah.
And also, it does what the original Star Trek series did. It has a message to it. And yet still is great fun.
Mhm.
Hmm.
This movie to me is, you're right. It is the simplest of them all. It really is. There's not a lot to it, and you don't have to be hit over the head with technobabble, and you can just get through it. But I think for me, the thing I love about this the most, and Brennan, I know you'll back me up on this. In its own way, it gave us cetacean observations.
Yes. There you go. There
In
you go.
Reilly, so if you don't know, which maybe you don't, since you don't watch the series, we've learned over the years that on most major large starships,
Mhm.
there are sentient whales that are Starfleet officers.
Or dolphins.
Or dolphins
Dolphins.
that are sentient Starfleet officers. And they are in a section of the ship called cetacean observations. Enterprise D had one, and it was only in the
It's
technical
cetacean
manuals.
operation.
Yeah,
This
oh,
is
I
because
thought
of
it was
this movie?
Cetacean
observations.
operations.
Yeah,
And it's because
but
of this movie.
I think so. I'd like to
Yeah.
think so, because Next Gen comes right after this. This
Yeah.
is 1986. Next Gen
It's 87.
87. So
Okay.
in the technical manuals, I wouldn't be surprised if this idea of cetacean ops,
It actually is on the Enterprise D. There is a
Mhm.
cetacean.
and now we have
And then we
actually
see it.
That makes
Yeah.
sense.
lower decks.
Lower Decks has it. Yes.
Right.
Very cool.
Yes.
With a couple of dolphins. So yeah.
They're beluga whales, actually. They're
Oh, beluga whales.
They're
Yes.
beluga
Yes,
whales.
yes.
Yeah. But I really think that this film opens up that possibility. Maybe, just maybe. And I think there are books about this.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is true or not, but for some reason it's clicking in my head. There are Star Trek books, beta canon, where George and Gracie are basically the first cetacean officers in Starfleet and go with Gillian Taylor on adventures into
makes sense.
space.
That makes sense.
Now,
That's
again, I could be totally wrong, but something in the back of my head is going, I think this was a book. I
yeah.
do think this was a
Yeah.
book. But anyway, we get that because of this film. And the one with the whales, it opens up so many possibilities. And what's more science fiction-y than space whales?
Right. Seriously.
Doctor Who did it.
Star Wars did it.
Star Wars
Farscape
has had
did
a
it.
couple of them. Yeah.
Mhm.
Star Wars doesn't have space whales, but maybe now they do.
No, it
Rebels.
does.
Do they have space whales?
Yeah, yeah.
Rebels. Watch Rebels.
Watch
Oh.
Rebels.
Okay. Space whales. See what I mean? Thank
Yep.
you, Star Trek 4.
Who defeated Grand Admiral Thrawn.
Mhm.
But next week, we return back to our own time and continue our journey. And the randomizer has already told us what our next episode is going to be.
Okay, let's hear it.
We are going on a trip on the Enterprise D, season 6, episode 22, Suspicions. This is the one with Dr. Crusher narrating about this experiment and how it becomes a murder mystery. It's a fun one.
Very cool.
It's a good one. Good one.
At least it's not Sub Rosa.
You do realize it's gonna happen eventually.
I don't
right?
want to watch that one.
I don't want to watch it either, but we're gonna at some point. Oh, Reilly, where can the people find you?
Pleasure, gentlemen. Find me on Twitter at Reilly Around. Go there, and you'll see a bunch of my Patreon stuff. That's mostly what I'm doing nowadays. Patreon.com/Reilly Roundtable.
Absolutely. Brennan and I are members of the
Guys
Patreon.
Are
Yes.
the best.
Yes, and we
Best
love
members.
it.
They speak from experience. Thank
So
you.
come join us for some fun. Those of you
Yeah,
who haven't
absolutely.
already.
Brennan, where can the people find you?
You can find me on Twitter, Brennan Mystical. You can find me on Facebook at Brennan Marr. You can find us on YouTube now at Page Turners They Were Not, which is now our YouTube website, as well as the podcast on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, wherever you find podcasts. You can also, of course, follow us on me on Twitch at Brennan Marr, Brenn. and you can follow me, of course, at Hanging Out with Reilly, Hanging Out with Video Drill, Hanging Out with a Certain Point of View, with Let's Get Ready, with the Outlet Nation. The list goes on.
Awesome. And of course, you can find me at C Ingle 1984 on Twitch, on Twitter, and of course, hanging out here on this podcast. And from time to time, hanging out with this man, Mark Yodi Reilly, in his Patreon, as well as occasionally on Riley's Cantina and other forums where we get to talk about nerd stuff. And Reilly, before I give our standard sign off, I do have to ask one question to you that I can't believe I forgot.
Yes.
If we took you back to 1986, what piece of advice would you give 1986 for Mark Reilly?
If the
Don't
Last
say,
Jedi
don't
will
say
come
buy
out.
Apple.
No, I would tell him to keep playing. Stick with those piano lessons. You would have a lot better life.
And with that, we end every episode. Applaud and live long and prosper.
Peace and one life.